Hi and welcome to RCKicks. On today's show, well, the plan is this. We're going to build a vintage blazing star from Tamiya. Yeah, we're going to build up all the chassis in great detail. Then I'm also going to fit vintage electronics in it. So if you would like to see each step of this beautiful vintage kit, stay tuned. Also, I've done an unboxing video of this, so if you haven't seen that, I'll put a link up here. Go check that out first as we cover all the parts that are in this kit. Not that I don't think you're going to find a new inbox version of this anymore, as this is actually quite a rare one. Now, I do plan on raffling this off, so I'll put a link in the description if you would like to win this just for a few dollars, few pounds, few euros with free shipping. Right, I think that pretty much covers everything, so let's crack on and get this beauty built. Now, while I was filming this build, I had a couple of cameras recording. Unfortunately, one of them decided to have a mental breakdown and I lost a bit of footage. So the first bit of footage that's missing is me building up the diffs. Now, there was nothing super complicated on the two diffs. They went together really easy. So the first bit of footage you're actually seeing is step 2. This is the spur gear being put together, as well as all the gears in the rear of the car. Now, one thing you'll notice in this kit is the drive gear and the idler gear are actually metal. They're not plastic. Some are and some aren't, depending on which kit you get. I did hear, don't know how true this is, that the metal gears can actually react with each other and turn into some strange paste. Never seen it myself, but that's what I've heard. Now, of course, I'm going to put bearings throughout this car for the new owner. There's no point building this all up and just leaving plastic ones in. Yes, you could argue this is only going to be a shelf queen, but I think while you're doing it, you might as well put the bearings in the car. Now, this kit is pretty straightforward, so it won't take you long to finish up all the diffs and all the gears. A little bit of light oil to go on everything. Well, if I was planning to put this on the shelf, you could probably build it dry, but being that the new owner, I'm not sure whether they'll swap out the vintage electronics, put something modern in it and want to drive it. Now, unfortunately, I lost the footage when I fitted the motor, but it's very straightforward. You just connect the motor to the mount, slide the mount in, and then there's just 2 screws that go straight through it. Now, this is a really good design, apart from the mount is in plastic, so it tends to break. So you can get aluminium ones, especially if you're going to race it with the Top Forces and the Top Force Evos. Having a metal one of those is definitely the way to go. So that's the rear of the car now finished, so we have to turn our attentions to the front and fitting the diff. What I didn't realise at this time is I'd actually made a bit of a mistake, but in a little while we'll come back to it and I'll show you what I did wrong so that if you're building one of these, you don't make the same silly mistake. On this kit, the front diff and the rear diff are identical, so it doesn't matter which one goes into which area. So I've just fitted the front diff into the front diff housing. Then we've just got to put the bottom plate on. The bottom plate also holds the bottom arms that we fit later on. Now, as this kit is a vintage one, the plastics are quite brittle, which is why I'm using a screwdriver throughout the whole build, as it is very easy if you're using an electric screwdriver to overdo it and just crack the plastic. Especially on the chassis, I found in this kit was very, very soft. Now, you're seeing me backtracking a little bit as I made a mistake. I was supposed to make up 2 of the prop drive units and I only made up 1, so I had to quickly go back and make this one up. Not that it was a problem, but it was just something I missed in a previous step. So basically with this kit, you build the rear diff, the front, and then you attach them both to the main chassis. Now, soon we're going to get to the part where I realized I've made a mistake with the rear diff. Now, I go to fit the out drives that go into the rear diff and I slot one in and then you slot the other on the other side and I realize they don't line up. That main pin should go right the way through the diff and come out the other side, and then when you fit the out drive on the other side, it should actually clip together, but I'm really struggling to get them to line up. When you look into the actual diff itself, it's off to one side and I can't quite understand why, and I just try and straighten it out a little bit just to see. Sometimes they get a little bit stuck and then you can just straighten them out and then it will be fine, but I had more of an issue than I've had before, so I think something's definitely wrong. So I then remove the back section that's holding the diff in so I can take a look at it, as it just doesn't seem to be sitting right. Then I realized what the problem is. I've actually put the diff in round the wrong way. If you look at the manual in the top right, you'll notice that the end should be facing to the left and mine was to the right. Now, the reason this is a problem is this diff should connect to the larger spur gear and because the spur gear was touching the edge, it was pushing the diff out and not engaging it. So that's what the problem is. So if you get the same thing, don't force it. That's the main thing, and then just backtrack a little bit and eventually you'll find the silly mistake. So after fixing that little mistake, we can turn our attentions back to the manual for step 9. That's fitting the damper stay and the top links. Now the top links in this kit are not adjustable, whereas the Terra Conqueror, that came with adjustable tie rods. Now while fitting these top links, make sure you get the orientation correct. They can be a little bit tricky to understand which way round they go. There's a little tiny notch on the top of it which references against the manual to tell you which direction. Double check, as it is easy to put one the wrong way round. Now as you can see in this footage, I've actually built up the lower arms already and put the uprights. These are the rears. Now unfortunately I lost that footage, but later on you will see me build up the front arms, which are pretty much identical style. It's a two-piece arm that you actually have to bolt together, which is a little bit different. You don't see that every day. Now on the rear of this car, the hinge pins are screw type, which means you slide it in and then you screw the end. Now I'm really not a fan of those at all, as there's a lot of vintage cars that those screwing in action puts a lot of pressure on the arms and ends up cracking it. But on this one, the actual lower arms are quite a soft plastic, so it isn't too much of a problem. Also on the front, there's a different pin design, so you don't have the same issue. Also, if you wanted to, you can upgrade to a standard pin that uses C-clips, one at the front and one at the back, that kind of holds it in place. That's something I would definitely do if I was going to go racing with, say, a Top Force Evo. Now the arm design is actually quite clever. Having it in two parts and then you screw it together makes it really strong, but they're very light. Now I've never run these in anger, so I couldn't say how strong they are overall, but they seem to be pretty good as they're made of a flexible plastic. Now another little silly mistake or something to watch out for is when you're building out the outdrives, you have to slide them into the hub. Make sure you do that before you fit them to the C upright, as there's no space. So as you'll see in a minute, I built one up, went to put the actual outdrive in and it doesn't fit, so I have to take it off and fit it again. So now you'll see me struggling to fit the axle into the hub. I just can't get it in, it won't clear, so I have to take the two bolts out, the pivot bolts on the top and the bottom, to allow me to get it in. So just something to be mindful of. Now the Blazing Star is kind of an interesting kit, as it's basically a parts bin car that Tamiya had created using parts that were used on different cars. Now the body itself comes from the Terra Conqueror, as well as a lot of the other chassis parts. The only real things that were changed is the shocks were changed to yellow CVAs and the rims and tyres. Now the Terra Conqueror was a much more expensive kit, as it came with a motor and it came with full bearings, and back in the day that was very expensive. So this is kind of like a poor man's Terra Conqueror, and a lot of people don't even know about it, or they don't really like it. Personally, I think it's a really nice one to have, as it's quite a rare one. If I'm honest, trying to find a good one of these is very difficult. Now unfortunately, I don't think we're ever going to see a re-release of the Blazing Star or the Terra Conqueror, mainly because I guess the Blazing Star wasn't that popular and the Terra Conqueror was just way too expensive for them to actually reproduce it, including the motor. Now a nice little clever design was the hinge pin on the front was like a C pin. You actually line up the lower arms and then slide the pin in, and then it's held in place by the front bumper. This is pretty clever. Now this kit has dog bones all round, but the more expensive higher end kits had universal drive shafts. Now it might not feel like you've actually made much progress, but actually we're further along than you might think. That's the whole front basically finished, and then we have the rear. Later on we've got to build up the shocks, fit the shocks to the front and rear, and then turn our attentions to the electronics. Once that's done, you've basically created the whole rear in the front of the car. Then we just bolt them to the chassis and then suddenly it starts taking shape. But first we've got to build up the shocks. Now these are oil shocks. The only difference between the front and rear is there's a little insert that goes into the front ones to shorten the piston length. Now these vintage shocks can be a pain to build up correctly. It's very easy to get air trapped in them so that as you push the piston up it locks. Also you get rebound where you've got a bit of suction that pulls the piston back in again, and getting them uniformed is actually a real challenge. But on these 4 that I just built up, I had no problems at all. I didn't have to revisit any of them. They all went together pretty nicely. Can't say what I did different with these ones versus ones I've had issues with, but all in all, didn't have any problems with them. So even though it's an entry-level kit, you don't have friction shocks, but you actually have oil, which is nice to see, but they're still on a budget. As you can see, the pistons are all one thing. You can't change the bore hole sizes. They're basically just a metal top with the edges cut off slightly. Maybe that's what made it easier for me to put these together. Now, if you think you're going to be building up quite a few kits, definitely worth picking up some shock pliers that I have here. It just makes your life so much easier. Also, if you're going to be building up adjustable tie rods, again, you can use this tool to make your life much easier, as well as pushing out ball studs and things like that. Now, I think this kit has been imported from Japan as it didn't come with any greases or oils. And obviously Tamiya will always supply that in kits if they actually have oil shocks. So the telltale sign is Japan can't ship oils, it's against their rules. So I think someone has imported this into the UK to then try and sell it on eBay to try and make a bit of money, because obviously this kit would be cheaper in Japan than it would be in the UK. Now, while we're waiting for all the air to escape from the oils, we might as well cut out all the collars and get everything ready to put the caps on so that we can finish these up and get back to the car. Now, rightly or wrongly, the way that I've found works best when you're trying to put the caps on the top of your shocks after all the air has escaped is to push the piston 2/3 of the way up inside, then put the cap on and do it up very slowly. You want to give it time to get that trapped air out as well as the excess oil. If you do it up too quickly, you will actually trap the oil, the excess oil and the excess air in there, and that way when the actual piston goes all the way to its top position, it will lock before it reaches that position, so you can tell. Then you'll have to open it out and get that out. Now, you should be able to move the piston in and out freely without any resistance or the piston being sucked back up into the housing. If you see this, you want to take the cap off again and try and seal it up by getting the air out as best you can. Now, fitting these shocks to the arms couldn't be more simple. There's just a single screw with a washer that you just pass through the actual top and the bottom of the shock. Then you have the spacer and then you just screw it straight to the car. It's as easy as that. And the front is installed pretty much identical to the rear. If I could just ask you to take 2 seconds, if you've watched the videos and you've watched a few and you enjoy it, to hit that subscribe button. 58.6% of you that watch the channel aren't even subscribed. It costs you absolutely nothing. And being that we're such a small RC channel, every new subscriber really helps the algorithm find our content and push it out to more RC fans like you. Right, we turn our attentions to the electronics, and this was a real challenge as I didn't have in the manual how to fit a mechanical speed controller. I had to reference another car. Apparently, when this kit was released, it came with a little side sheet that showed you how to put a mechanical speed controller into this car. Now, I managed to find 2 servos. Yes, you need 2, one for the steering and one for the mechanical speed controller, as well as a vintage receiver. Now, I'm going to make a little bit of a mistake in a minute. I've actually fitted the servo mounts on the wrong way round. The servo should be flipped the other way round, but it's a simple fix. Now in the next episode when we paint up the body, I will put some time in to see if I can actually get all these electronics to work. I didn't have a chance to test them and they're all from different bits and pieces. Now this is going to be a shelf queen, so I don't think it's really going to ever get driven with these electronics, but it would be nice if I can get them working for the new owner. Now if you're going to fit a mechanical speed controller to this top plate, you actually need another part and you have to screw it in from the underside, so you have to fit it before you then attach the top plate to the chassis. Now after rectifying my issue with the servo being fitted incorrectly, I changed the mounts and then we attach them to the chassis. This is very straightforward. You fit the single point first and then there's an adjustable slider hole. Obviously depending on the width of the servo that you're fitting, it gives you lots of options. Now to fit a mechanical speed controller, you obviously need a second servo. Now there is a mount space for that and all the parts you need are in the kit. There's a little slider mount that you have to fit to the top deck first, and then you can screw in the actual servo into both ends of the mounting points. Once that's done, we can actually fit the mechanical speed controller. This is only 2 screws that you just screw straight down onto that top bracket that you added earlier. Now another thing I got out of sequence that I had to go backwards is the switch mount. The switch mount actually slots onto the upright that the top deck bolts to. So I had to undo the top deck to actually fit the switch housing into the chassis. Now it took quite a bit of faffing around to get it all in, but there you go, that's all the vintage electronics in the car. And that's one big step forward to finishing the chassis. Next we need to bolt on the front, and it's as easy as 3 bolts on the top and I think it's 2 bolts on the bottom. Now it's definitely feeling like we've finally turned a corner and we've got what looks like a finished buggy. After that we need to connect up the steering and then fit the rims and tyres, and then we're pretty much done. Now I know it's not for everyone, but I love having vintage cars that have all the vintage electronics in them. It just makes them feel more complete. But obviously if you're going to drive this is not the way to go. It's much easier just to fit some modern electronics and then just take it out, and you know it's going to be reliable and it's going to work and it's not going to lock in full speed, zoom across the car park and smash into a curb. So now that's done, we've just got the rear tiny little bumper to fit. That doesn't take 2 seconds and it's only a single screw. After that, I think it's just the hexes and then the rims and tyres. Now a lot of people don't like the rims and tyres that this kit come with, but as a collector I kind of like things that are a bit different and a little bit odd, and these rims and tyres definitely wouldn't be your first choice for a buggy, but I kind of like them. They're quirky and I think that sums up Tamiya completely. Now I've got the tyres on, we can actually set the spring rates, just adjusting them so that it kind of feels even on the front and the rear. I went with soft shock oil, which seems to be okay. It was a bit of a guess, it didn't say in the manual, but I'm quite happy with it. And there you go, after a good few hours, a lovely vintage buggy comes to life. So there you go, that's the chassis built, all done, and yeah, it was really nice. I enjoyed it, very simple if I'm honest. I've done quite a few of these cars now, so I kind of know what to do and what not to do, even though I did still make a few mistakes, always do. Now one thing I wanted to do with this one is, as it's quite special being that it's straight out of new in box, I wanted to try and put the vintage electronics in it. Now there was a bit of a debate in the unboxing video. In the manual, it kind of referenced putting an electronic speed controller in it. And I wanted to put a mechanical speed controller in it. But some people said, well, it didn't have one. It wasn't supposed to have one. It's supposed to have the electronic one. It's a later car. On the side here, it's got a mechanical speed controller in it. And also on another side, it's got the mechanical speed controller in it. So I think this kit came out just at the transition where they actually moved away from the mechanical speed controllers, but I wanted to put one in it. Now I did a Terra Conqueror and that had a mechanical speed controller in it. So I thought, well, I had enough bits and pieces left around, so that's what I've done. I've actually built it up with all vintage electronics. Because the person that's going to win this, really this is a shelf queen. You're not going to run this. It's too fragile. and it's 2 in good condition. If you ran this, there's probably not that many of these that are actually in mint condition, so this is really going to sit on the shelf. So that really, I wanted to put the correct electronics in it to make it look a bit more special as well. So I hunted through all my parts and I managed to find enough bits and pieces to make it happen. The only thing I'm missing now is the bar that goes between the servo and the mechanical speed controller. I may actually have one in my parts bin, but I'll have to rummage through it off camera later on. So I'm really happy with how it turned out. In the next episode, the plan is we're going to paint up the body. I've got the paint. We're going to do it PS16, which is the metallic blue, my favorite blue that Tamiya do. And then I'm going to use all the original decals and the original body, and then it should be a lovely example of the blazing star. So if you would like to win this, I'm going to leave all the electronics in it. You will get it just as it is. Can't guarantee they'll work, but it will definitely look the part. I'll put a link in the description. You could win this for a few dollars and a few pounds. Anyway, see you on the next one. Bye-bye.